Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that everything you had planned for your life, all the dreams, the steps, and the paths you'd envisioned, no longer seem to align with your reality. You feel lost, confused, and a bit betrayed, asking yourself, why isn't this working? I did everything right, I planned for the future, I made the right choices. Why does it feel like things are falling apart? The truth is, this moment of confusion is not uncommon. Many of us have experienced the frustration of trying to follow our own plan, only to find ourselves stuck, disillusioned, or uncertain of what's next. But what if I told you that this moment of struggle could be the exact moment God is calling you to surrender your plan for His? You see, God's plan often looks completely different from our own, and that's exactly how it's supposed to be. In fact, God's plan is always better than our plan. It's not always easy to accept, but His wisdom, His timing, and His purpose for our lives are far beyond anything we could have imagined or orchestrated on our own. We all have dreams, aspirations, and visions for our future. And it's natural to feel disheartened when we feel like those dreams are slipping away. We put in the work, we sacrifice, and we wait patiently for our plans to come to fruition. But as many of us have learned, our plans don't always go the way we thought they would. That's when we often hear that still small voice of God saying, trust me. It's in these moments of confusion and frustration that God is teaching us an important lesson about faith, trust, and the importance of aligning our will with His. His ways are higher than our ways, His thoughts higher than our thoughts, and His purpose for our lives is far more beautiful than anything we could ever design ourselves. The Bible is filled with stories of people who had their own plans, only to have God completely change their course, sometimes even dramatically. Think about Abraham, who was promised by God that he would become the father of many nations. Yet for years, he and his wife Sarah struggled with infertility. The promises seemed delayed and doubt crept into their hearts. But God's plan unfolded in His perfect timing. When Abraham was well beyond the age to father a child, God gave him a son, Isaac. Abraham's plan was about timing and possibility. But God's plan was about faith and trust in His power to do the impossible. And that's just one example of how God works in mysterious ways, often turning our expectations upside down to reveal His greater purpose. In those moments of frustration, where we feel like our plans have failed, it's vital to remember that God sees the bigger picture. He knows what we need before we even ask, and He knows the path that will lead us to the purpose He has for us. Our plans may seem logical and even well thought out, but God's plan is based on eternal wisdom, divine understanding, and the perfect timing that we as humans are unable to comprehend. Sometimes we want things to happen on our terms, according to our timeline, but God's timing is always flawless. His way might not always be the easiest way, but it's always the best way. We live in a world that teaches us to control our circumstances, make our own path, and shape our own destiny. But the more we try to control, the more we realize how little control we truly have. That's when God steps in and reminds us that His plan has always been in motion. Even before we were born, we are not in charge of our destiny. He is. When we stop trying to force things to happen, when we let go of our own plans and surrender to God's will, we open ourselves up to the blessings and guidance He has in store for us. One of the greatest truths about God's plan is that it's not just about us. His plan is bigger than our individual desires and dreams. It's about how He can use us for His glory and to fulfill His purpose for the world. It's about how our lives can impact others, bringing them closer to Him. Our plans may be about what we want to achieve, but God's plan is about His eternal kingdom, and He knows exactly where He needs us to be to make that happen. This is where our trust must grow, when we allow God to shape our path, knowing that He is leading us to something far greater than we could have ever imagined. The beauty of surrendering our plans to God is that we don't have to carry the burden of figuring everything out on our own. God promises to guide us, to give us wisdom, and to lead us on a path of peace, even when the world around us is chaotic. So as you reflect on your life, your plans, and your dreams, remember that God's plan is not just a better plan, it's the perfect plan. It's the plan that leads to fulfillment, joy, and a life that brings glory to God. The moment you stop clinging so tightly to your own understanding and open your heart to His leading, you'll begin to see His perfect plan unfold before you. And when you look back, you'll understand that all the waiting, all the confusion, and all the moments of doubt were just part of His process of shaping you for something greater. God's plan is always better, and when you embrace it, you'll see that His way is the way to true freedom, purpose, and peace. There will always be moments in life where we feel like we have it all figured out. We set our goals, we make our plans, and we start taking steps toward the future we envision. It feels good to have control, to feel like we are in charge of our destiny. But there's something that we often overlook. God's plan is never bound by the limits we place on it. While we may feel confident in our understanding of what's best for us, God's wisdom far exceeds anything we can comprehend. His plan is not only greater, but more perfect, more fulfilling, and more aligned with His divine purpose. No, there's a certain peace that comes with letting go of our own expectations and choosing to trust that God knows best. This doesn't mean that God's plan will always be easy or comfortable. In fact, many times it requires us to step out of our comfort zones, to move in faith even when the path ahead seems unclear. But it is in those moments of uncertainty that God's guidance shines the brightest. When we surrender our own desires and align ourselves with His will, we allow ourselves to experience the fullness of His promises. His plan isn't just better for us in the moment, it's better for eternity. It's the plan that will ultimately lead to our deepest fulfillment and the fullest expression of who we were created to be. It's important to understand that surrendering our plans to God doesn't mean abandoning our dreams or giving up on our aspiration. Rather, it's about recognizing that God knows the best way to fulfill those desires. Many times, we chase after things that seem good in the moment, only to realize that they don't bring the lasting peace or joy we expected. We see other people's success, their achievements, and we want the same for ourselves. But God knows the deeper desires of our hearts. He knows what will truly satisfy us. Our plans often focus on short-term goals, but God's plan focuses on our long-term well-being, both in this life and in the next, When we choose to trust Him with our journey, we can be sure that He is leading us towards something far greater than we ever imagined. He is shaping us, molding us, and preparing us for a life of purpose and meaning. And while the journey may not always be easy, the rewards of walking in alignment with God's plan are immeasurable. Every time we let go of our own plans and trust in His, we take one step closer to experiencing the peace that passes all understanding. God is never taken by surprise, and He always knows what's ahead. When we trust Him, we can rest assured that He will guide us toward a future far more beautiful than we could have ever planned on our own. There are moments in life when we feel completely overwhelmed, when our plans seem to fall apart and everything feels out of control. In those times, it's easy to question God. Why is this happening? Why is it not going according to my plan? This is where we can easily miss the deeper truth. God's ways are higher than ours. His understanding of the situation is far beyond what we can see. God sees the full picture, every detail, every moment, and every ripple effect that will follow our choices. We, on the other hand, often see just a small sliver of the puzzle. When our own plans start to crumble, it's a chance to trust that God's perfect plan is already unfolding in our lives. It might not always look the way we expect, and it might take us to places we never imagined, but His plan is always rooted in love and grace. In the midst of uncertainty, it's important to remember that God is not a distant figure who sits idly by as we struggle. He is deeply involved in our lives, guiding us, loving us, and constantly working things together for our good. Even when we can't see it, God's hand is at work, orchestrating circumstances and timing in a way that will ultimately bring about the best outcome for us. Think about the stories in the Bible where people had their own plans, but God had something better in mind. Take Abraham, for example. God promised him descendants as numerous as the stars, but Abraham had to trust God's timing. There were moments when he must have wondered, God, where is the promise? But Abraham chose to trust, even when his plan seemed impossible. And in the end, God's plan was fulfilled in a way far beyond anything Abraham could have imagined. His faith became a powerful example for us all. Similarly, think about Joseph. He went through betrayal, imprisonment, and hardship, yet all along, God was preparing him for something greater. In the end, Joseph realized that every painful experience was a necessary part of God's perfect plan to save many lives. Joseph's story is a reminder that even when we are in the depths of despair, God's plan is still at work. It might not always look the way we want, but God's timing and purpose are always perfect. So when our own plans begin to unravel, we can find comfort in knowing that God's plan is not only better, but also filled with far-reaching goodness that we can't always see in the moment. One of the hardest things to do is to release control over our lives. We love to be in charge, to plan our future, and to manage our outcomes. But God's plan requires something more: surrender. It's a humbling thing to admit that we don't have all the answers, that we can't control the future, and that we need God's direction. Surrendering our own plans to God doesn't mean giving up on our dreams or resigning ourselves to a life of passivity. It means placing our dreams in His hands and trusting that His way will always be better than ours. Surrendering doesn't always feel easy. It requires vulnerability, trust, and faith in something bigger than ourselves. But when we trust that God has our best interests at heart, the act of surrender becomes a peaceful release. Instead of holding tightly to our plans, we can rest in the assurance that God is the one steering the ship. We are not alone in this journey. His strength, wisdom, and love will guide us through the twists and turns of life. Surrendering to God's plan is the first step to walking in the freedom He promises, knowing that His path is far greater than anything we could ever create on our own. As we continue to navigate life, we encounter moments when we are faced with decisions that seem to challenge the very essence of what we believe about God's plan. It's in those moments that we must pause and ask ourselves, do we trust God enough to let go of our own will? The truth is, our own plans often come from a place of desire, ambition, or fear, desires to protect ourselves, to succeed, or to avoid pain. But when we rely solely on our own plans, we limit God's ability to work in our lives in ways that are far beyond what we could ask or imagine. His plan doesn't just involve achieving our goals. It involves shaping us, molding us, and drawing us closer to Him in the process. Sometimes it's not about the destination. It's about the journey. God uses every season, every challenge, and every blessing to refine us and help us grow into the person He created us to be. Imagine the strength that comes when we surrender our lives to God's plan, not out of fear, but out of faith in His perfect timing. When we surrender, we don't just say, "I trust you," with our words. We say it with our actions, with our willingness to wait when it's hard, to step forward when it's uncertain, and to remain steady when things don't make sense. There's a peace that comes with this surrender, a peace that surpasses understanding. It's the kind of peace that allows us to face the storms of life without feeling overwhelmed, because we know that God is in control. His ways are higher than ours, His wisdom is greater than ours, and His love for us is deeper than we could ever comprehend. The more we align ourselves with His plan, the more we begin to see that His way truly is better. We experience His provision, His guidance, and His presence in ways that we never could have if we had held on to our own desires and control. And that's where the beauty of God's plan truly shines. Even when we feel uncertain, we can trust that God is working behind the scenes. Our lives are not dictated by random chance or a series of unfortunate events. Everything that happens, both the good and the challenging, is part of a larger divine plan that God has been orchestrating since the beginning of time. When we choose to believe this, when we truly understand that God is actively involved in every aspect of our lives, it shifts our perspective. Instead of viewing hardships as obstacles, we begin to see them as opportunities for growth. Instead of looking at closed doors as failures, we recognize them as divine redirections. God's plan is not always easy to understand, but it is always full of purpose. And even in the moments when we feel lost or confused, we can trust that God is using every circumstance to shape us and bring us closer to His heart. This understanding requires us to embrace the idea that God's timing is perfect. When we are living out our own plans, we are often rushing, pushing, and forcing things to happen. But when we follow God's plan, we can rest in the assurance that He knows the right time for everything. It's not about rushing to the next step. It's about trusting that when the time is right, God will lead us forward. The Bible tells us in Ecclesiastes 3, 11, that He has made everything beautiful in its time. There is a beauty in God's perfect timing that we can only fully appreciate when we stop trying to rush the process and allow Him to work at His own pace. When we align ourselves with His timing, we discover a peace that comes from knowing that we are not in control, and that's exactly how it was meant to be. God's plan isn't just better than our plan. It's far greater and more fulfilling than anything we could ever imagine. And when we surrender to His timing, we can rest in the assurance that His way will always lead us to exactly where we need to be. There are times in life when we experience disappointment, frustration, or a sense of being stuck. It's in these moments that we often ask ourselves, why isn't my plan working? Why isn't things going the way I expected? We've all been there. But it's during these challenging times that God is quietly reminding us of the importance of faith in His perfect plan. It's not always easy to see the bigger picture when we're in the middle of our struggles, but just because we can't see the whole story doesn't mean God isn't writing it. When we step back and reflect, we realize that some of the greatest blessings we've experienced came through trials we never would have chosen for ourselves. God knows exactly what we need when we need it, and how we need it. Trusting in His timing and His methods is an act of surrender that releases us from the burden of having to figure everything out on our own. It's easy to want to control the outcome of every situation, to shape things according to our preferences. But when we take control, we often try to force things in our timing and according to our understanding. And that's when we miss out on the greater things God has in store for us. You see, God's plan is never limited by our ability to understand it. He's working in ways we can't always see or comprehend. He doesn't need us to see the whole picture right now because He knows that His plan is perfect, even when it doesn't align with our expectation. This is where faith comes in. Faith isn't about knowing exactly how everything will unfold. It's about trusting that God's way is better than our own, even when we can't see the path ahead. It's about holding on to the belief that God is good, His plan is good, and He will lead us to the right place at the right time. Think of the story of Abraham and Sarah in the Bible. God promised Abraham that he would be the father of many nations, but they were old and without children. For years they waited, and they wondered if God's promise was ever going to come true. Sarah even laughed at the idea of having a child at her age. But God had a bigger plan in mind, a plan that was greater than Abraham and Sarah's limited understanding. And in His perfect timing, God delivered. Sarah bore a son, Isaac, and through him came a line of descendants that would ultimately bring Jesus Christ into the world. God's plan was so much bigger than what Abraham and Sarah could have ever imagined. In their waiting, they learned to trust God's timing. They learned that while their plans might fail, God's plan would always prevail. God's timing might not always match our timeline, and that can be hard to accept. But when we trust Him, we begin to see that every delay, every obstacle, and every challenge is part of His process of shaping and preparing us for what's next. It's easy to grow impatient, especially when we see others around us achieving their goals or getting the things they've longed for. But instead of comparing ourselves to others, we should focus on the truth that God is with us, guiding us at every step. His path may not look like anyone else's, but it's the one that's best for us. When we follow His lead, we are walking in alignment with a plan that's far greater than anything we could ever dream up on our own. Sometimes, we need to be reminded that God's plan is bigger than our individual desires. Our vision for our lives may be limited by our immediate needs and short-term goals, but God sees the bigger picture. He sees the entire span of our lives and knows exactly how each chapter connects to the next. Our plans often center around what makes us comfortable or happy in the moment, but God's plan stretches far beyond our temporary desires. His plan has eternal significance, and it includes not just our lives, but the lives of others. He weaves our story into a larger narrative that impacts those around us, our families, our communities, and even generations to come. This is why His plan is always better than our own. It is designed with a purpose far greater than we can see right now. In those moments of doubt and uncertainty, we must remind ourselves that we are not alone in this journey. God is constantly at work, even when we can't see it, even when we feel lost, even when things don't make sense. His love and His purpose for us remain steadfast. remain steadfast. And as we trust His plan, we are ultimately embracing the truth that His way will lead us to the best version of ourselves and to the life He always intended for us to live. When we let go of our plans and let God take control, we are walking in His will, and we are walking into the future He has prepared for us. It's not always easy, but it is always worth it. Life often has a way of throwing unexpected challenges at us, and it's in those moments of uncertainty that we can find ourselves grasping for control. We want to fix things, solve problems, and ensure everything goes according to our plans. But here's the hard truth. Sometimes our plans aren't meant to succeed the way we envision them. When we try to force our will, we may find ourselves struggling, frustrated, and feeling as if we're fighting against an invisible current. This is where the beauty of trusting in God's plan comes in. While we see only fragments of the story, He sees the entire narrative, beginning to end. And in His wisdom, He directs our paths toward a future far greater than we could ever create for ourselves. It may seem difficult to relinquish control, but in doing so, we allow God to guide us to the places and experiences that will shape us into the people He created us to be. When we hand over control to God, we are stepping into His promise. We are trusting in His timing, even when things feel delayed, and we are surrendering our own agenda to trust in His divine orchestration. God knows what's best for us, not just for today, but for the entirety of our lives. And His ways, while sometimes different from ours, are always rooted in love, grace, and purpose. The challenge, however, lies in our willingness to surrender our own timelines, our desires, and our expectations. We often think we know best because we can see only what's in front of us. But God has a long-term vision for our lives. It's a vision that's been carefully crafted by the Creator of the universe, one that will bring us peace, fulfillment, and purpose that goes beyond anything we could achieve on our own. Take a moment and think about your own life. There have been times, I'm sure, when you've made plans, set goals, and worked hard to see them come to fruition, only to be met with setbacks or even failure. Those times may have left you feeling discouraged or confused, wondering why God would allow such disappointments. But what if those setbacks were actually a way of protecting you? What if the closed doors were God's way of redirecting you towards something even greater? In our limited understanding, we may never see the full picture, but God sees it all. He knows that some paths lead to greater growth, joy, and fulfillment than others, and He's guiding us down the right one, even when it doesn't align with our immediate expectations. This is where faith comes in, the ability to trust that God's plan is far superior to our own. It's the trust to know that even in the midst of pain, heartache, or confusion, God is working behind the scenes to create something good out of it. We may not always understand His ways, but as we grow in our relationship with Him, we begin to realize that His heart is always for us. He is not against us. His plan for our lives is full of hope, and it's a plan that will lead us to a life full of purpose, peace, and fulfillment. When we begin to let go of our own agendas, we create space for God to move and to lead us into something that is far better than what we could have imagined. There's a beautiful verse in the Bible that says, "For I know the plans I have for you, and declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future." Jeremiah 29:11. This is a promise that we can hold on to in the midst of uncertainty. While our plans might not always work out the way we want them to, God's plan is always for our good. It's easy to get caught up in the whirlwind of our own desires, but we must remember that God's plan has eternal significance. It's a plan that encompasses not just our personal happiness, but the well-being of others, and ultimately the glory of God. When we surrender to His plan, we are stepping into the fullness of what He has prepared for us. In times of uncertainty, remember that God's way is always better. It may require patience, trust, and a willingness to let go of our own timeline, but the reward of walking in His will is beyond measure. We might not always understand why things are happening the way they are, but we can trust that God is working everything for our good. When we yield to His plan, we find peace in the waiting, joy in the journey, and fulfillment in knowing that we are living the life He created us to live. There's no greater fulfillment than knowing you are in the center of God's will, trusting that His plan is always the best plan. We all go through moments in life where the weight of uncertainty can feel unbearable. We wonder, why is this happening? Or what am I supposed to do next? In these moments, it's natural to try and find our own way out, to create a path that leads us to where we think we should be. But here's the thing. The more we try to force our plans, the more we can feel lost and frustrated. It's a harsh reality, but the truth is, our plans often don't align with God's ultimate purpose for us. And that's okay. Because God's plan for our lives is rooted in His perfect love, wisdom, and understanding of what will truly fulfill us. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply to trust that He knows what's best, even when we can't see the full picture. We have to release our need for control and surrender our desires to Him. When we make the decision to surrender our plans to God, we are making an intentional choice to trust in His wisdom. This act of trust is not easy. It requires deep faith and a willingness to lean into the unknown. But it's in that very place of letting go that God begins to work in incredible ways. In moments of silence, when God seems distant, He is actually preparing us for something greater. It's easy to become disheartened when things don't go according to our timeline, but those moments are often the ones that precede a breakthrough. What we see as a delay may actually be God's perfect timing. His delay is not a denial. It's a preparation for something better. Something that will bring us deeper into His will. As we learn to release our own agenda and trust God's plan, we also start to see life from a different perspective. Our eyes are open to the beauty of God's design, even when it doesn't match our expectations. We begin to understand that His way, though often mysterious, is always for our good. We might not understand the details, but we can trust the character of the one who holds our future. And that trust allows us to rest in His peace, knowing that He is working all things together for our good. This doesn't mean that life becomes easy or without hardship, but it means that even in the hardest moments, we can find comfort in knowing that God is in control. Think about some of the most difficult moments in your life. Reflect on the times when your plans seemed to unravel, when your heart ached, and when you felt lost. Now think about where you are today. You might not have understood at the time, but looking back, you can see how those very challenges led you to growth, to new opportunities, and to deeper reliance on God. In the moment, it's hard to see, but God's ways are not only higher than ours, they are better. Now better. His plan for us is woven with His love, His purpose, and His perfect timing. Every detail is intentional, and every step is for our good. As you walk this journey of faith, it's important to remember that the purpose of your life is not about achieving your own plans. It's about aligning yourself with God's will. When you align with His will, you discover a life that is full of peace, joy, and fulfillment. It's not always easy, and it certainly doesn't happen overnight. But the more you surrender your plans, the more you will experience the incredible peace that comes from trusting in God's wisdom. His plan may look different than what you expected, but it will always lead you to a place of greater purpose and fulfillment than anything you could have imagined on your own. In every season of life, trust that God is leading you towards something greater. Even when it feels like you're walking through the unknown, even when it seems like your plans have failed, God is working behind the scenes. He sees what you cannot see, and He knows what you need before you even ask. Trust in His perfect plan, and know that as you follow Him, He will guide you to a life far beyond your expectations. Have you ever been in a situation where you felt like your life was spiraling out of control? You tried everything in your power to make things work, but nothing seemed to go the way you planned. You questioned, where is God in all of this? Doesn't He care about my struggles? It's in those moments of uncertainty that we are often reminded of something so crucial. God's plan, though often unseen, is always at work, even in the darkest of times. There may be seasons where it feels like He is silent, where you wonder if He has forgotten you, but it's in those very moments that He is closest to you, preparing you for what's ahead. You see, God doesn't need to speak to you in loud, obvious ways for His plan to unfold. Sometimes His quiet presence is His way of teaching you to trust, to lean into Him even when you can't hear His voice. God's silence is not abandonment. It is His invitation for you to step into a deeper relationship with Him. It's easy to mistake silence for rejection, but God is often speaking in ways that require patience and trust. This is a lesson that can only be learned through faith. When God is silent, He may be teaching you the most profound lessons of all: patience, endurance, and trust. These are the qualities that will carry you through even when life doesn't make sense. When you feel like your plans are falling apart, take a step back and remember that God's purpose for your life is much bigger than your immediate circumstances. What may seem like an obstacle right now could be the very thing that prepares you for a greater calling in the future. In the silence, you are not alone. God's presence is always with you, and even when you cannot hear His voice, His love for you never wavers. Think of the story of Job in the Bible. Job went through unimaginable suffering, loss, grief, and pain, yet he never once abandoned his trust in God. Even when God seemed silent, Job understood that God was still at work. And in the end, God restored what was lost, giving Job more than he had before. The story of Job reminds us that God's silence does not equal His absence. He is always working, even when we cannot see it. Your trust in Him, especially in the silence, is a testimony of your faith. It's in these quiet moments that God is doing His most profound work in your heart, preparing you for the blessings that are on the other side of your struggle. When God is silent, He is teaching you to let go of your need for control. You see, it's natural to want to fix everything, to make our lives go according to our plan. But God often uses silence to remind us that He is the one who holds the plans, not us. He calls us to surrender, to trust that He knows the way, even when we can't see the path ahead. It's in the act of surrender that we experience peace, because we are no longer burdened by the weight of our own expectations. Letting go of the need for control doesn't mean abandoning hope or giving up. It means trusting that God's way is better, that His timing is perfect, and that He is using this moment to shape you into the person you are meant to become. When you release your grip on your own plans, you open yourself up to the beauty of His purpose. As you continue on your journey, remember that God's plan for you is always for your good. Even when things seem confusing, even when His silence feels like a void, know that He is orchestrating every detail of your life. He sees the bigger picture, and He is leading you towards something far greater than you could have imagined. The moments of silence may feel uncomfortable, but they are often the very spaces where God is growing you the most. Trust that, even in the quiet, He is working behind the scenes to bring you closer to His will. In time, His plan will be revealed, and you will look back and see that every moment, every silence, was a step in the direction He always intended. When you're going through a difficult season, it's easy to feel like God is distant. You may have prayed, you may have cried out, but it feels as if your prayers are going unanswered. In these moments, it's important to remind yourself that God's silence is not a sign of abandonment. His silence doesn't mean He's ignoring you. It means He's allowing you to grow. God has a way of shaping us through the quiet, through the waiting. He's teaching you to rely not on the noise, not on your circumstances, but on His unwavering faithfulness. It is in these moments that He is refining you, preparing you for something greater. You see, sometimes God needs to silence the world around us in order for us to hear His voice more clearly. The busyness of life often drowns out His still small voice, and so He allows moments of silence to draw us closer to Him. The beauty of this silence is that it teaches us to trust, even when we can't see the whole picture. Imagine you're in the middle of a fog, unable to see where you're going. You can't rely on what you can see, so you have no choice but to trust the direction you're being led. In the same way, God's silence forces us to trust in Him completely. We stop relying on our own understanding and begin to trust that He is guiding us through the fog of uncertainty. God's plan is often beyond our understanding, and it is in the silence that He calls aside our faith in a deeper way. It's easy to have faith when everything is going well, but it's during the quiet, uncertain seasons that our faith is tested and refined. God's silence is not abandonment. It's an invitation to trust, to deepen your relationship with Him, and to surrender your control. But how do we navigate God's silence? The first thing to remember is that He's not silent because He doesn't care. In fact, God's silence is often an expression of His love. Think about a parent who allows their child to make decisions on their own, even though they know the child may make mistakes. This isn't a sign of neglect, it's a sign of trust. In the same way, God trusts us to make decisions, to grow in our faith. and to come to Him when we need guidance. Sometimes in His silence, God is allowing us the space to grow, to make choices, and to learn to rely on His wisdom. His silence teaches us patience. It teaches us how to wait, and it teaches us that His timing is perfect. It's also essential to remember that God's silence isn't forever. Just as the darkness of night eventually gives way to the light of day, God's silence is temporary. There are seasons of waiting in life, but they don't last forever. There will come a time when God will speak, and when He does, you'll understand why He was silent all along. The waiting period prepares us for what is to come. It builds our endurance, our patience, and our trust in God's perfect timing. And when God does speak, when His plan is finally revealed, you'll see that every moment of silence was worth it. It was the very thing that prepared you to receive His guidance and His blessings. God's silence also teaches us to be still and listen. In a world that is constantly busy, constantly moving, it can be hard to slow down and truly listen to God. But in the stillness, we learn to hear Him more clearly. It's in the quiet moments, when all the distractions are removed, that we are able to sense His presence and feel His peace. The silence calls us to step away from the noise of life and focus solely on Him. It's in this space that we can connect with God on a deeper level, free from the busyness and chaos that surrounds us. God's silence is an invitation to deepen our relationship with Him, to seek Him with all our heart, and to listen to the whispers of His voice. In those moments when you feel like God is silent, remind yourself that He is working behind the scenes. Just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not happening. Trust that God is moving in ways you can't yet understand. He is preparing you for something greater than you could have ever imagined. Don't let His silence discourage you. Instead, use it as an opportunity to grow in your faith, to trust more deeply, and to lean into His presence. In the silence, God is doing something significant in your life. And when the silence ends, you will see that it was all part of His perfect plan. As we come to the end of this journey of understanding God's silence, it's important to remember one thing. God is always working, even when you can't see it. The silence that may feel overwhelming right now is not a sign that God is absent or indifferent. Instead, it's an invitation to trust deeper, to lean into His presence more fully, and to develop the kind of faith that isn't shaken by circumstances. It's easy to believe in God's plan when everything is going well, when things are clear and easy. But real faith, the kind that moves mountains, is forged in the quiet, in the moments of waiting. It's in those moments when we don't have all the answers that we must trust in His wisdom and His timing. God's silence doesn't mean He's forgotten you. In fact, it may be the opposite. It may be that He's preparing something incredible in your life. Think about a gardener who plants seeds in the soil. At first, you don't see anything happening, but beneath the surface, the roots are growing deep. Over time, that seed will break through the soil and bloom into something beautiful. In the same way, God is nurturing your faith, strengthening your spirit, and preparing you for the next season of your life. You may not see the results yet, but trust that something amazing is unfolding behind the scenes. Don't give up in the silence. Instead, rest in the knowledge that God's plans are always good, and His timing is always perfect. There will come a time when the silence and God will speak clearly to you. His direction will be evident. His plan will unfold in ways you never expected. You'll look back on this period of waiting, of silence, and you'll see that it was in those moments that God was working the most. Silence allowed you to grow, to mature, and to be prepared for the blessings and the challenges that were ahead. When God speaks, His words will make all the silence worth it. It will be clear why He asked you to wait, to trust, and to lean on Him. And remember, God is with you in the silence. Even when it feels like He's distant, He's closer than you think. In those quiet moments, He is strengthening your faith, building your character, and preparing you for what's next. You are not alone. God sees you. He hears your prayers. He knows your heart. His silence is not a reflection of His absence, but of His perfect timing.